Chapter 25. Bran. She waited until nightfall to make her assault. After hours of staring and studying through her visor, she felt she knew the face of the wall as thoroughly as possible. The ridge she had climbed, while providing an excellent perch for reconnaissance, did not present a favorable angle of approach. For that, she crossed to the next ridge, with a wooded slope of mature cedars that came down close to the foot of the next tower, allowing her to creep in the gathering darkness to within a stone's throw. The space between the forest and the tower was a forgotten place. No vegetation grew there, and animals feared to tread. A maintenance door stood barred and locked at the foot of the tower. It was reinforced and likely closely monitored. She had decided on climbing the seam, where the tower body jutted out from the face of the wall. She would be invisible to those inside the tower, and hopefully those in the next tower would not make her out in the darkness. The guards walked between towers in intervals of 15 to 20 minutes, likely assuming that the difference was enough to throw off intruders. But Sabrina had timed them throughout the afternoon and had their intervals memorized. After tracking the last guard into the tower, she left her hiding place, crossed the scree bed at the foot of the ridge, and latched to the tower, the microfiber grip of her gloves expanding and contracting on the surface. A few feet up, she slipped, a fine dust of debris falling on her visor, shoulders, and the wall with a noise like soft static. She caught her breath, her muscles straining as she regained purchase. The surface of the wall was soft and granular, like sandstone. She had not calculated for that. Her suit could still grip, but she would have to move more slowly. She found a new rhythm, careful to maintain equal balance of push-pull between her arms and legs. The visor displayed her time. She had 7 minutes before the next guard returned, but she was still much lower than she had planned to be. As she reached the height of the walkway, she found that soft lights shone at foot level, casting the side of the tower in a ghostly glow. She fought an urge to look out over the land to the south, and swung to the northern face of the tower, where the faint light illuminating a footpath would not reach her. A few more minutes of climbing, and the tower windows were just above her. This would be the closest test. She had no way of seeing inward with the visual spectrum. Her infrared showed that there was no one on the other side of the wall, but its vision to the far end of the room was compromised. The only break in the smooth surface of glass was a support strut, a narrow corner where the glass gave way to stone. She had hoped it would be wider. It was even narrower up close. The wind gusted, buffeting her and whipping her ponytail to the side of her face. She decided there was no sense in waiting. This is when Lindsey would pray, she thought, reaching up her hand, letting it grip, pushing up with a foot, then a knee. She had planned to scramble up the portion quickly, but with the surface so unstable, she was forced to move inch by uncomfortable inch alongside the implacable glass. The midnight land reflected on either side of her, and the wind increased to a howl. She stopped to steady herself and catch her breath. The gusts sucked the air right out of her mouth. When they died down, she began moving again. The windows just below her she climbed with extra care so as not to send a rain of grit that would give her away. Sweat was rolling down her neck in rivulets. Her hands made loud scraping noises on the stone, which, in her intruder's paranoia, she was certain must be audible inside. The windows moved out of reach. She continued up the face of the tower. No alarms sounded, no floodlights swung around on her. The wind increased. She was higher than the top of any building in the Twin Cities. The forest was now a patch of undulating green that extended to the horizon. A flock of birds exploded from a tree as if suddenly disturbed, before settling down again. Even at the height of their flight, they were no more than specks to her. The wall at this height was more weather-beaten, its surface scoured by sand and wind, making it smoother and easier to grab. Although she did not dare become overconfident, she continued in her methodical crawl. She was now nearly halfway between the ring of windows and the top of the tower. One window remained in the space between. She had noticed that these upper windows were not smoked, and figures moved behind them at irregular intervals. Not a sentry post. More like a barracks. Her suit reminded her that her heart rate was increasing as she neared the window and peered in sidelong. 3 men in various states of uniform dress sat in a semicircle. One wore his collar open, one had stripped off his jacket. Another wore uniform trousers but a casual long-sleeved shirt. Their uniforms looked like her own patrol suit, except that the color scheme was grays and blacks instead of the familiar black and blue. The men's attention was directed to a monitor displaying what appeared to be a pitchball match. With gentle movements, Sabrina placed a listening pod on the glass. Deep male voices filled her ear, along with the breathless, unbroken commentary from the match. She could understand nothing. The rhythm of language was there, although it was faster than she could follow, full of words she did not know, and consonants from deep in the throat that were completely alien. But their laughter and gestures transported her easily to any after-hours session where officers watched a match. The game was a revelation. The rules of the match and the field were familiar, but the setting, the grass, ultra-green, the lines a brilliant white, so different from the dusty fields and trampled grass of the Fortinbras Stadium. The stands were nearly as large as the wall she clung to, jutting into the night sky, filled with thousands of people in colors of clothing she had never seen. A profusion rendered in sharper detail than any of the monitors in Fortinbras could, even in the head ministry. It made no sense. She studied the room. Lest she forget this was a military outpost, racks of plasma rifles lined the walls, as well as helmets she recognized for the T-shaped opening on their faces. One of the teams scored, and the men screamed, making Sabrina's eardrums flutter. When she yanked the listening pod from the glass, she could still hear cheering and whooping through the window. The men felt too close. She reached up and continued climbing, finally reaching the railing at the peak of the tower and pulling herself over. The red light set on a black metal stem was bigger than it had appeared from the ground, and was as wide across as her forearm. Next to the light was a hatch to the floors below, and a fold-away glider, with its wings and turbines eerily similar to an Elvad. The wind whipped powerfully, and she steadied herself by holding onto the light stem, walking unsteadily towards the far end of the tower, her muscles exhausted from the climb. The desert opened up in a rush of air that shook the sand from her shoulders, swirling it around her like a robe. What she saw was remarkable for its banality. The lands were indistinct from the lands she had already traveled through, except that this landscape was forbidden. Absent were any signs of blast craters, glowing radioactive soil, ruined cities, or seared rock. No skeletons, human or machine, sat moldering as she might have imagined in the deadlands of a global holocaust. The patrol suit picked up 0 radiation. She flipped through the lenses, her vision fading to black when she examined the landscape for rays on that end of the spectrum. None at all. Something caught her eye, and its glow in the visible spectrum and in the infrared was so bright she was surprised that she had not noticed it before. She zoomed in on the cluster of brightness to the southwest, and her heart jumped. At first, she could not comprehend what she was seeing. It looked like mesas and rock chimneys lit with radioactive afterglow, or perhaps an illusion in the desert atmosphere, a rare refocusing of starlight refracted into milky streams and rectilinear columns. But she knew a city when she saw one. The grid lines and gauges projected on her visor told her how far away and how large it truly was, much larger than Fortinbras. Its light seared the night sky and drowned out the stars in a grayish soup. It spewed light like a volcano, with fissures erupting all around it. As she telescoped in further, she could perceive that the cracks were roads leading from the core to the environs, where more suburbs, more light, extended all the way to a hazy horizon. This was no third city, some outpost for head ministry workers. The stadium, the voices, the people. The horrifying truth was coming together. The tower rocked beneath her. Even the glass in the red lamp rattled, followed by the boom of an explosion. A second shudder vibrated the floor underfoot. Then another blast followed from the northeast. She opened up the sound receivers on her headset, and a cacophony of running feet, shouts, and the unmistakable pop of projectile weapons filtered in through her earpiece. Infrared showed her a white blob descending from a ridge to the north. The mass broke into individual figures charging the wall. A third explosion, followed by 2 more. The wall was under attack. Floodlights on the walkways spun and burned down on the intruders, turning night into day. Men wielding projectile and plasma rifles stopped in the glare and fired upwards. Their assortment of ancient and current weaponry, their faded outdoor wear, their sand-stained faces told her who they were. Rebels. Believers. Many fell as fire from the wall rained down, their bodies slipping and tumbling down the slope of the ridge, sending up clouds of dust and cedar needles. But more came. They poured out of the cover of the forest. A flash to the west caught her eye. More rebels bolting down the next ridge over, their weapons sending salvos upwards at the wall. To the east, another arm of attack was surging forward from the cover of a ravine. Rebels swelled outward like ants emerging from a colony. Rockets left trails of smoke hanging in the air. The detonations blew out smoke and dust from the wall, sending forth a hail of cement shards. The wall forces countered. Gray and brown-clad soldiers in patrol suits like hers filled the walkways. Immediately below her, the rebels were focusing their attack on one of the reinforced maintenance doors at the tower base. Wall guards sent down a fury of plasma fire, the rose-colored plumes strangely beautiful in the evening light. Bodies of rebels began to pile up until a group charged with shields strapped to their arms. They bunched together and overlapped their shields above their heads. With exception of a few lucky shots that dropped some of their number, they moved closer to the wall, unhurt by the volleys of plasma. Guards from above dropped sonic charges, but they were set to timers, not for impact, so they clattered off the shields and rolled to the side, where they discharged with minimal damage to the rebels' flanks. A cluster of occultists under the cover of shields set grenades around the maintenance door, while soldiers on the tower top and walkways concentrated their fire, their shouts becoming increasingly frantic. They dropped more charges, these set to detonate on impact. The impenetrable shell of shields parted. A clump of rebels were scattered, their shields bent and limbs broken. But it was too late. The grenades exploded. The tower and wall swayed. Sabrina grabbed the railing. 3 wall guards dropped over the railings and fell to the ground. Their bodies disappeared in the spreading plume of dust and smoke. The red signal light was creaking and rocking behind her as she tried to steady herself. The base of the wall was hidden in a debris cloud. Guards fired into the wall of dust randomly. Sabrina switched to the infrared. Through the smoke and haze, she saw another wave of rebels streaming down the ridge. It was an avalanche of men. Their numbers were disappearing into the wall. The door was breached. They were inside, where they would find her, in her suit. They will take me for another soldier on the wall. Had Theopin known this? Was she a scout? An away party? A diversion? No. I'm a target. The scope of Theopin's betrayal came down on her like one of the towers themselves. Her skin felt aflame, despite the cold wind. Figures rushed about below. She grabbed her blaster, pausing when she realized her peril was still small. The wall guards were not likely to shoot her, as she looked like one of them. The rebels were still a tower away. She had time. All she had to do was escape, return to camp to tell Lindsey everything, and get away from Theopin and his cult. She would figure out where they would go later, but that city in the distance was a real option. A city. A whole city outside the walls. Save the details. Only immediate escape mattered now. Another explosion at the next tower sent soldiers tumbling from the top. Rebels poured out of the door onto the walkway. They had climbed quickly, and the tower had been overrun. They were taking no prisoners. Wounded guards crawling for cover were shot in the face. Some were tossed, still alive, over the side. A handful made a dash for Sabrina's tower, but they were shot by rebels who knelt to steady their aim. The soldiers fell one by one until only a single one remained. Even as he reached the door, he stumbled as a bullet struck his leg. The soldier let out a cry that sounded vaguely feminine before he slammed the door. Rebels raced down the walkway in pursuit as additional projectiles cracked against the stone and whanged against the door. 2 plasma grenade blasts lit the night and blinded Sabrina momentarily. They dissipated with a hiss against the wall, the stone cracking loudly from the incandescence. A door slammed on the far side of the tower. Sabrina crossed under the lamp and leaned over the railing. The one remaining soldier was pulling himself in the direction of the next tower, leaning heavily on the railing, his left leg bleeding and useless. Although he tried to stand, he kept falling, his helmet getting hung up on the railing. Out of frustration, he ripped it off his head. He was a she. White blonde hair slipped out of a tie and whipped around her face. She cried out as she strained to pull herself forward, even as another explosion shook the wall and sent her sprawling onto the walkway. From the vibrations, Sabrina already knew that the tower she was on was breached. She became aware of the wall guards clustering on the next tower over, their plasma rifles lit black against the red lights, watching their comrades struggle. They were not coming to help, and the poor woman knew it. Fear blanched her face. As the door behind her rang with more blasts from within, the wounded guard looked to her distant comrades at the next tower, then back at the door. In that instant, she resigned herself to her fate, propping herself against the wall, her injured leg out in front of her, and her good leg bent. She drew her blaster and braced it on her knee. Sabrina could not understand what was unfolding. The tower guards could see her. Why not come to her aid? There was no one to help. Except Sabrina. She had been watching as a bystander, but the guards at the next tower might be wondering why she did not act herself, clad as she was. They take me for one of their own. Escape was her priority, but when the woman looked up at her and their eyes locked, she knew she could not leave. She holstered her blaster, activated the suit's adhesive surfaces, and leapt over the side to descend carefully. But a second blast threw her from the wall, sending her into a free fall. She extended her left arm and flattened her palm against the passing surface. The glove pulled her close, but it was too much weight, too much speed to stick. She slid, her descent arrested but ruining the glove. She swung a knee and foot. It was enough. She stopped abruptly as the visor flashed messages to her about structural damage to her left glove and compromised adhesive function. Just a short distance above the walkway now, she dropped the rest of the way and let the suit absorb the impact of the fall. She landed beside the woman who pointed her blaster at her. "I'm here to help you," Sabrina said, noting the flash of confusion in the woman's expression. The woman made the split-second decision and reached out her hand. Up close, she was older than Sabrina had first guessed, at least 10 years her senior. Sabrina was pulling her to her shoulder when the wall exploded, sending them backwards in a swarm of debris. The heavy metal door landed just short of them, rocking on the ground, bowed and bent. Chunks of cement clattered around them. A cloud of smoke and dust billowed outward, choking them both. A mountain of rubble was collapsed in the hole formed by the explosion. The woman's blaster had been knocked beyond her reach. Sabrina groped for hers, raised it, and aimed into the chest of the first rebel that came scrambling through the cloud. He raised his rifle, but neither he nor Sabrina fired. "Sabrina?" "Bran!" He had strung bandoliers of grenades over both shoulders, crossing them over his chest. A number of holders were empty. His clothes were covered in dust and blood, his head wrapped in a scarf in the same fashion she had used crossing the desert. "Bran, what is going on?" "We're taking the wall. For supplies." "What are you doing here?" he said, turning the rifle on the woman and offering his hand. Sabrina took it and stood up. "Theopan sent me here. Gave me my suit back." "He didn't tell you about the assault?" "No. It's like... Never mind. Look. Can you see it?" she said, running to the railing and pointing. "It's a city. Larger than Fortinbras or Lysander, isn't it?" She swept her right hand at the lights in the distance, then turned to the woman, who had seen her face, strangely impassive. Sabrina grabbed her collar. "You better start talking if you want us to live. Is it bigger than Fortinbras?" "It is," she said, her words strangely accented. Bran pushed between them, his mouth a frown of resignation. "Sabrina, we're not taking prisoners." "Why not? We can learn what that city is. There might be other survivors from the cataclysm." He glanced at the light on the horizon, but a haze had materialized, and at this distance the city was only a faint glow. The buildings and roads were indistinct. Sabrina offered her visor. Bran refused. "She is an agent of the Ministry. You can't believe a word she says,"
No, she is not. I would know. I would have seen her before.
Sabrina pleaded, revealing as much as she could without exposing her true connection to the head ministry. She shook the visor.
Just look through the visor, Bran. Just look.
I'm sorry, he said, looking over his shoulder at the gap in the wall. Sabrina could hear the other rebels clamoring over the rubble.
There's already too much suspicion on Theopen's part. We can't afford to be insubordinate now.
His eyes flashed pity before they hardened, and he raised the rifle, placing it against the woman's head. She closed her eyes as he tightened his trigger finger, but not before Sabrina put her blaster to Bran's chest and fired. A yellow stun flash popped in the air between them, and he stumbled back onto the rubble pile. Voices sounded from the other side of the shattered doorway. Sabrina and Bran stared at one another, both surprised that the stun blast had not rendered him unconscious. He felt his chest, jerking his hand away suddenly when he touched the grenade that was overheating.
"Crite,"
he said, trying to work the grenade that had absorbed the blast out of its sleeve. But the metal had already expanded, making it impossible to free. The explosive began to squeal.
"Take them off! Take them off!"
Sabrina cried, wrestling with the bandoliers. The strap of his rifle was tangled, and he had fastened the bandolier's ends tightly with double knots.
"I'm sorry, Bran, I'm sorry,"
she was saying as she reached for a knife in her boot to cut them, but the whine of the grenade had reached a higher pitch now. Bran turned, his arms stiff, and shoved her free of him before he stepped towards the railing. He spoke as much as, "Into your weapons," before he disappeared over the side. The wall exploded, the blast throwing Sabrina and the woman to the far side of the walkway, where the railing wobbled but stopped them from going over the edge. She watched as a rain of fragments sailed downward and smashed into the unforgiving ground. The smoke cleared. A massive section of walkway was now missing, and a portion of the tower had collapsed, blocking the gap Bran had crawled through. Rebels shouted and screamed from the other side of the wreckage, calling out for him, asking what had happened, heaving aside chunks of cement that Sabrina could hear and feel rumbling through the pile. Her vision blurred by tears, and her ears nearly deaf, Sabrina picked up the woman, flung her over her back, and carried her to the one clear patch of walkway against the tower. When she placed her glove against the surface, it slid down uselessly. The rubble beside her was moving. Red blasts of plasma sprayed between the fallen bricks. The rebels had taken to simply trying to vaporize the debris that remained. Bran's comrades were still calling his name. Sabrina listened, terrified that she would recognize a voice. A blast seared her left foot, the sensation so intense that it took her mind a few moments to settle on calling it pain. She began to falter, but the woman slapped her face. When she tried to speak, neither of them could hear. Sabrina lifted her arm to fire her grapple, the woman helping to steady it, clearly familiar with the mechanism. Even though Sabrina's elbow shook with exhaustion, the wire traced a graceful curve up the side of the tower as it unspooled. The glove transferred the tactile sensation of the smooth cement floor on the rooftop to her fingertips, which was quickly replaced by the rigidity of the grapple as it clutched the railing.
"Hold on,"
Sabrina croaked, hoping that the woman would understand her. The woman tightened her grip around Sabrina's neck, and the winches in the suit activated. The extra weight slowed them, the apparatus in her arm vibrating terribly. More blasts turned the rubble below into powder. Rebels broke through, but now that Sabrina and the woman were clear, the guards on the opposite tower opened fire, pinning the rebels to the door, sending one fighter down the crater left by Bran's detonated bandoliers. Sabrina found herself double-checking to make sure it was not Denalius, Sprocket, or Grange who fell. Whoever it was, he landed next to the remains of Bran's body. She watched the bundle of clothes that was left of her friend, painfully aware that he had now saved her life twice.
And how did I repay it?
They reached the roof of the tower and collapsed. The walkway on the far side was now teeming with rebels. Sabrina put her ear to the hatch and heard the unmistakable clatter of feet banging up a metal walkway.
"They're coming,"
Sabrina said, readying her blaster.
"The glider!"
The woman screamed, pointed to the power set folded in the corner. Sabrina rolled it out and, following the woman's instructions, unfolded the wings and charged it, the twin turbines humming to life and cracking with blue flames. They struggled to lift it over the railing into the narrow ledge on the other side. With the woman's injured leg and Sabrina's burned foot, the best they could do was let it crash down, both of them leaning over precariously to keep from rolling off the edge. Sabrina was holding it steady as the woman belted herself in when the hatch on the tower deck opened. A rebel emerged, the back of his head thankfully turned towards her.
"Crite!"
Sabrina said, letting go with one hand to draw her blaster and fire a full jet of plasma at the hatch. The shot scattered in a bright flash and slammed the door back down. The glider began to cantilever over the edge. When it was clear Sabrina could not arrest its momentum, she let herself drop over the edge too. They fell, the glider, the woman, and Sabrina. The air rose into a roar about Sabrina's ears. The turbines spat flames, and she let go of her blaster and reached for the wing with her right glove, the only one with intact adhesive grip. The glove caught just as the turbines fired on full power, and the glider's trajectory changed. They were still plummeting, but now rocketed sideways, the thrusters slowly eating into their downward momentum. They made a sickening dip, wobbled, then soared, teetering from one side to the other. Sabrina was thrown back and forth, doing her best to avoid the engine's exhaust. She realized that her own weight and placement were making it impossible for the woman to steer the craft. Behind them, shooters were lined up on the tower and walkway. Bullets dented the airfoil on either side of her. Plasma blasts sizzled by her head. She smelled burnt hair. A blue flare erupted from the turbine to her right as a shot struck home, and the engine choked. The craft careened to the side, battering Sabrina against the wing before going straight down. Sabrina's last thought just before impact was that she was indeed cursed. City on a Hill, Volume 4. A Dream of Kali. It is nonsense to claim that terrorists have no morality. Charges of nihilism against an adversary usually reflect ignorance of the adversary's moral framework. Suicide bombers are often motivated by beliefs they hold sacred in their own moral reasoning. Scott Atran, Ph.D. The Moral Logic and Growth of Suicide Terrorism. The Washington Quarterly. Spring 2006, page 136. Chapter 26. Zell. Sabrina could not feel her legs. Waist down was a single, steady, undecipherable numbness. She strained to move her foot and heard her boots scraping against underbrush. Twigs, leaves, seedlings ground under her heel. It was as sweet a sound as she had ever heard. Encouraged, she propped herself up on her elbow. She then realized the unrelenting sensation throughout her body was not numbness, but pain. Pain so uniform and intense that it canceled any other feeling. But she kept herself balanced on her elbow to watch her knees bend and legs unfold, just for the relief of knowing they worked and that her back was not broken. She tried to study her surroundings, but turning her head sent pain shooting through her neck. Even as she winced, the tensing of her muscles caused an even greater pain in her chest. For a moment, she could not even inhale.
"Crite. A fine mess I am."
She had tumbled off the glider wreckage and onto a rock that her rib cage had folded around. She suspected a bruised, even broken rib. The glider was a wreck, its structure twisted and its metal skin torn, making her wonder if the pilot had survived. Walking was still out of the question, so she crawled on hands and elbows to the opposite side of the crumpled airfoil. The glider had hit the trees at an angle. The wing had cut through branches, snagging them in the intakes and wedging them in the ailerons. The starboard side had taken the brunt of the impact, crumpling up to the protective bars around the right seat. Had Sabrina been sitting there, she would have been crushed. The left-hand seat where the woman sat had been farthest from the impact. She was still alive, although the frame around her had been jammed onto her chest, making it difficult for her to breathe. She was struggling with the buckle, which had pulled back over her hips as the struts of the craft had bent. With her arms pinned against her shoulders, the belt latch was out of her reach. Sabrina unfastened it and set her free. The woman cried out as she brushed her wounded leg against the wreckage, leaving the deformed metal red, as if it had been passed over with a paintbrush. Sabrina settled her against a tree trunk, the effort exhausting both of them. Through the branches above that they had broken through, The stars were visible. Sabrina still saw the city lights, burning as if right before her face. She had killed Bran. That knowledge was worse than any physical pain she was experiencing. She was surprised she had not died in the crash. It was what she deserved. She felt like she would vomit and had to steady herself against another tree. The air popped with a few more explosions, the hiss of plasma rifles, and the shouts of men while she strained to keep control. Her thoughts were jumbled. She had so many questions, and no answers, no solutions. She had just wanted to know how Bran could have been so insistent on killing the woman. Was there something he knew that she did not, or was it just the endless brainwashing all the rebels received from their leaders? Is it real? The city. Is it real? Sabrina asked, the words catching in her throat. The woman looked at her strangely, her chest still heaving. Sabrina could not wait for her to compose herself. I killed a good man for you. You better answer. She spat. It's real. It's real. The radiation? The woman shook her head. Doesn't exist. At least not here. She stopped abruptly and turned her head in the direction of approaching voices. You are a ministry officer? She spoke the words slowly as if she were not familiar with Sabrina's language. A cadet. Or I was. They will kill us both unless I am your prisoner. Sabrina's mind was still fogged, but she slowly caught the woman's meaning. You'll have to cuff me, the woman said. Sabrina decided it was a good idea, pulling a binding strip from her belt and slapped it around the woman's wrists. The woman she had killed Bran for, who wore a uniform like her own. Was it worth it? Was it worth Bran? More voices filtered through the trees. The woman tensed. Help them! Help them find us, or they will kill you as a traitor. Why are you... I don't know who you are, or what side you are on. But if you live, I have a chance. If you are dead, so am I. I don't know what you want, but I don't want to die. I want answers. I want to know what you are doing here. What that city on the other side of the wall is doing there. Sabrina said, angry, her cheeks flush with a rush of blood. The woman swallowed, closed her eyes, and leaned her head back against the tree. The sound of rebels in the woods were growing closer. I can give you answers, but... The woman paused. But I might not believe you. You might not want to believe. Sabrina could hear branches and underbrush snapping underfoot, a plasma rifle charging. I'll decide what I want to believe, but you give me answers, I'll keep you alive. Don't make promises you can't keep. I'll keep it. The woman gave a feeble nod. Done. Sabrina struggled to stand, leaning heavily on a cedar tree until she mustered the strength to limp to the side of the glider, open a panel, and remove a flare. She snapped off the end and primed it. You tried to escape, Sabrina said. I leapt on the glider to stop you. It crashed when it took fire from the wall. The woman nodded in consent as she removed her belt and wrapped it around her leg as a tourniquet. Sabrina struck the flare and its brightness blossomed outwards, drowning out the light of the stars. The rebels who found them were not men she knew, but they knew her. They came cautiously out of the woods, blinking in the blinding light of the flare, their rifles raised. They carried heavy packs and bandoliers of ammunition. Their pants were tucked into their boots, their heads wrapped with leather bands that held flaps to cover the sides and backs of their heads. They were outfitted for the desert, and the sand encrusted in their boots, on their knees, and discoloring their beards and hands, spoke of a long journey. A tall man, his long hair held back in a ponytail, ordered one of the men to kill the flare. We don't want any more company from the wall than we need, he said, leveling his weapon at Sabrina. He and his men took in the scene slowly. All of them looked gaunt, their clothes hanging loosely from their bodies and their belts pulled tight around their waists. Two younger ones, boys really, lined up on either side of Sabrina, their rifles aimed at her and the woman. Others moved around the perimeter of the clearing. Their long-haired commander stood in front of her, asking questions.
"What are you doing here? I don't remember you being a part of the assault."
Sabrina made a decision that the truth would serve her best.
"I wasn't, at least to my knowledge. Theopen came to me in the sanctuary last night while I was with Lindsey, and talked to me about believing, doubting, and truth. He said I needed to go to the wall, see things for myself, to understand. He gave me my patrol suit back, along with provisions. He never said anything about the assault. Don't know if he wanted me to see it, or be part of it, or get killed by it."
The skin on the side of her questioner's face twitched as if an insect had landed there. He rubbed the spot, his whiskers making a noise like sandpaper.
"Why do you think he would not tell you about it?" "Maybe he doesn't trust me. Maybe he thought I wouldn't come. I can't say. I don't profess to understand how Theopen's mind works."
She was trying to strike an honest tone.
"I spoke to him about doubt. He spoke to me about seeking answers. To get answers, I took her."
She nodded towards the woman, then recounted the version of events they had agreed upon.
"We were told to take no prisoners," the man said. "Then that is a more concrete order than I was given. He told me to seek understanding. Well, she is my understanding. I want to question her. We were told to kill all we encountered. I was not told that. Maybe we should not discuss this in front of the prisoner."
The man twisted his mouth as if making a difficult decision. Finally, he sighed.
"No time. We'll take her, but she's your responsibility. Roach," he said, turning to a figure in the brush. "Patch the prisoner's leg and get some bandages for Sister Sabrina's head."
Sabrina touched her brow. Her hair was matted with warm, sticky blood.
"My foot is burnt, too,"
she said, instantly regretting it, but the exhaustion, shock, and pain kept her from thinking straight.
"I need to be more careful." "Is that a plasma burn?" the man asked her. "No, it's from the jet."
The commander nodded, his eyes scanning the clearing, watching his men and the sky. The sounds of plasma and projectile fire still sounded in the woods all around them. Between the trees, Sabrina could see muzzle flashes, and above, plasma bolts shot back and forth from the ground to the wall.
"He maintains a strong sense of his surroundings,"
Sabrina thought, considering the commander. She respected that. She wondered if he was one of Grange's men, or one of Theopen's. Roach, the team medic, treated Sabrina's foot.
"Bran is dead," he said as he applied a salve. "You know him, right?"
Sabrina felt Roach and his commander watching her closely.
"How?" she asked. "Fell from the wall. He'd been the first through a breach in the tower. Too much rubble had fallen for the others to follow. Looked like one of his own explosives malfunctioned."
He dropped his eyes to the ground, genuine sadness in them. She concluded that this man was likely one of Grange's. When he raised his eyes again, he was looking in the direction of the wall, as if watching Bran's death unfold again.
"He fell down the same tower you launched from."
He shook his head and returned his gaze to Sabrina.
"Did you see anything?"
Sabrina shook her head and fought a lump forming in her throat.
"That's all right, I suppose," he said, tapping a black object strapped onto his shoulder harness. "We all got these."
"Got what?" Sabrina asked, squinting in the darkness.
"Cameras. Recorded everything from the attack. We used them to learn. We recovered Bran's. We'll be able to see his last moments. I'll tell you this much. If your prisoner pulled the trigger on him, I doubt she'll last long, no matter what answers she gives you."
The rebel force dispersed into the night as quickly as it had appeared, with fighting groups breaking into smaller bands of 6, each taking a different route back to their home base. Some not returning at all, but rather trekking to different desert hideaways or even joining other attacks to keep the Wall Watchers on the defensive. Wall Watcher was the name rebels used for the woman Sabrina had captured. Wall Watchers were considered to be on the same side as Ministry agents and T-men. Sabrina insisted to her companions that she had never come across their like in any Ministry department. Her prisoner offered no enlightenment. She rode in silence, cuffed to a stretcher borne between 2 rebels. Michael, the long-haired commander, suggested that perhaps Sabrina did not know about the Wall Watchers because she was only a cadet. She agreed in order to divert his questioning, but knew something did not add up. She had always thought that the wall's defenses were automated. What need was there for guards if the lands beyond were uninhabitable, even deadly? And yet a whole city waits on the other side. What is the wall hiding from us? Sabrina's gaze came to rest on the figure in the stretcher. What can she reveal? They marched through the night at a quick pace despite the prisoner on the stretcher. After a few hours, the men were too tired to talk. Sabrina was grateful. It gave her time to think through the mysteries swirling in her mind, but her thoughts produced no answers, only more questions. The rebels had taken plasma rifles, explosives, and also helmets, the same that the special investigators wore. These were more prized than the rifles. Each man carried at least 3 in netting slung over his shoulder. One rebel carried nothing but helmets. Even his own gun had been abandoned at the wall to grab one more set of headgear. What could be so significant about the helmets? The stars grew dim in the west as the sun began to rise. Before it was full light, the team made camp inside a cave they had scouted out the previous day. They ate, took their water rations, and set up a watch rotation. While the men slept, Sabrina checked on her prisoner. She was pale, her lips dry and cracked from dehydration, and an unpleasant odor wafted from the bullet wound on her left leg. Sabrina offered her share of water to her. She drank it down quickly. There was little else to say with the other rebels so close. Sabrina wanted to apologize. Michael was right. Her prisoner was in danger, even if she did not kill Bran. But releasing her was out of the question. Even if Sabrina could engineer an escape, flight was impossible with a bullet in her leg. Sabrina left her to rest. Before she could resolve a solution for her captive, her mind was pulled back to the camera on Bran. Michael said one of the other teams had recovered it from his remains. The image of his body lying there in the rubble made her breath catch in her throat. Exhausted as she was, she could not sleep, her mind racing from one incongruity to the next, one possibility to another. Instead, she went to the mouth of the cave where one of the rebels was keeping watch. Sabrina sat beside him, blinking in the intense daylight and listening to the humming silence of the desert, broken only occasionally by the screech of a passing Elved as it left a white vapor trail against the sapphire sky. Sabrina was glad to be hidden. She dozed, only to awake when Michael relieved the rebel guard. It was still daylight. Even in the shade of the cave, the heat from the desert was like an oven. Michael had stripped off his jacket and tied it about his waist. His hair was held up from his shoulders by a wet bandana tied around his head. Sweat darkened his short-sleeved shirt, which was stained with sand and oil. He adjusted the rifle strap on his shoulder, moving the metal buckle away from his skin, as if it was too hot to remain there. With blistered and cracked hands, he opened his canteen, took a drink, then offered it to Sabrina. Sabrina took it since she had shared her own with the prisoner.
"Couldn't sleep?"
Michael asked, resting his hands on his knees.
"No,"
was all Sabrina offered. After a long silence, she realized she owed Michael something more.
"Too many questions. You said you came to the wall for answers, but you have yet to interrogate the Watcher."
Sabrina had no reply. She had had ample opportunity to probe the prisoner while they hiked across the moonlit desert, but she had remained reticent, ruminating over what she had learned already. She was also protective of what the woman might reveal. Bran had not wanted to face the truth of the city. She guessed that these men, even if they were friendly with Grange, wouldn't be any better.
"You afraid?"
Michael's question broke into her thoughts.
"What did you say?"
she said, the tension rising in her chest. Beads of sweat dripped from her forehead. Her armpits stank with perspiration.
"You heard me, Sister Sabrina,"
Michael said. There was no challenge in his tone or on his face, just a calm that his whole body exuded, his legs out, his arms resting on his knee pads, and his rifle leaning against the wall.
"I would be scared. The Master knows what lies she might tell you. Or worse, the truth,"
he snorted. Sabrina felt her shoulders unwind. As much as she hated to admit it, Michael was right. She was afraid.
"You might not want to believe." "I did not want to question her in front of the men," she said.
"Wise," Michael said, his eyebrows rising.
"But they are now all asleep, and I won't disturb you."
She had waited too long. Sabrina stood up, her knees cracking. She was lightheaded from the heat and had to steady herself against the wall. For a moment her eyesight dimmed, and she focused on the feel of the sandstone beneath her fingertips until she felt herself again.
"You all right?"
Michael asked her.
"Just a little dehydrated. I'll take your advice and interrogate her. Good luck."
The prisoner was in the main room of the cave, set off from the sleeping rebels. It was dark, and it took Sabrina's eyes so long to adjust from the brightness outside that she flipped down her visor and took in the scene through the emerald view of her night vision. The suit was still over half charged, and she used its power to lift the woman up and carry her to another room towards the front of the cave. She passed Michael, and he gave a slow, approving nod. The woman had awoken the moment Sabrina had lifted her, but she said nothing. Sabrina put her down on a bed of scree and stuffed the satchel from Theopin under her head as a pillow. Sabrina offered her more water. After she had drunk, she said, "I don't imagine you brought me here because you wanted to find me a better place to sleep.
You know why I brought you here. There's not much time left before we reach camp."
"Zell."
"What?"
"My name is Zell," the woman said, her voice rising with a touch of impatience.
"Sabrina Sabria, was a cadet. I know who you are, cadet. Or at least, who you think you are."
"What does that mean?" Zell sighed.
"It means you have opened the floodgates, and are about to be overwhelmed. You'll forgive me if I'm growing a little weary of your proclamations of how dangerous the truth is. I get enough of that from those believers." "So you don't count yourself as one, Sister Sabrina?" she said, echoing what Michael had called her. Sabrina thought to answer, but was aware Zell might be trying to isolate her from the others, as if she was not already isolated enough. "You said you would give me answers."
Zell smiled.
"I did, and I will. Do you have good questions?" "I'm tired of playing games," Sabrina said, leaning forward, her voice rising, her hand resting on her blaster grip.
"But are you ready, cadet?" Zell interrupted her, her own voice rising with defiance. "It is not every day that you learn the entire world you know is a fiction. Not everyone can handle that." Sabrina felt a cold stab of fear in her gut.
"Try me. I'll decide what to believe."
Zell pushed up to a sitting position and adjusted herself against the wall. With a deep breath, she began. "The Twin Cities are not a refuge of the last survivors of a nuclear holocaust. They are a social experiment that no one knows how to stop. So there are people in that city I saw over the wall." Zell grimaced. "There are people all over the planet. Billions of them." Sabrina was doubtful. She had learned in school that powerful weapons had rendered most of the planet an uninhabitable wasteland.
"What proof do you have?"
"Nothing but a story, cadet. An alternative history to yours. One in which there is a cataclysm, but much smaller than the one you learned about in the ministry schools. An arsenal of weapons was never unleashed on the planet. One was. A civilization was not destroyed, but a city was. Millions were killed. Precious artifacts lost forever, all because of the actions of religious extremists. Yes, that much is true. But the worldwide conflict you are taught about never happened. It was a future we feared, but averted." Even in the darkness of the cave, Sabrina could see Zell's eyes gleaming with conviction.
"How was it averted?"
"A plan. By an ingenious young neuroscientist who proposed a region sealed off from the rest of the world where the extremists and religious could be corralled and cured."
"Cured?"
"Of memories, of hate. Their old identities stripped away, and new memories implanted. New memories of an invented apocalypse, new families that consisted of husbands and wives from formerly warring sides. Their children would be offspring of both. It would be a utopia, free of sectarian divisions of old that threatened to tear civilization apart."
A deception on an impossibly large scale, Sabrina said, making no effort to conceal her skepticism.
She could hear the other rebels stirring deeper in the cave. She was starting to regret interrogating Zell at all. She wanted the truth, and she was bitter that Zell had not cooperated. Her stomach twisted at the thought they would have to torture the woman for the actual truth. The scree crunched under her feet as she got up to leave. I thought, with so much time on that stretcher, you could have come up with a more plausible story. I wish it did sound more plausible. I wish you were not brainwashed. Sabrina turned on her, taking her collar in her fist. A whole population. 2 cities full of people, living lives and memories that are not their own. Sabrina released the woman and ran her sleeve across her forehead to absorb the sweat. She didn't care if her outburst had been overheard. The woman was spouting nonsense. I should have never taken her prisoner. Sabrina moved toward the entryway, but the woman spoke out. Cities canvassed by comtours that no one really understands. Patrolled by men that nobody knows, in helmets nobody else has. Open your eyes, cadet. My eyes are open. I saw a city, yes, but... She suddenly remembered the pitchball stadium she had seen. All the people, the ultra-green grass, the towering, gleaming buildings in the distance. I also saw an empty wasteland surrounding it. Without radiation. Sabrina was quiet. In her mind's eye, she again saw the blank readouts, the indicators of nil, where she had expected glowing radiation. When she did not answer, Zell continued from the darkness. I thought you of all people might believe. After all, you know the neuroscientist who started it all. You know Dagosta. The sun set in swirling bands of reds and purples. After a brief meal of dried rations, the rebels renewed their march. Sabrina remained at the vanguard, alongside Michael, where she could use her visor to scan the terrain before them. It also kept her clear of the rear of the group, where the rebels carried Zell. How could I have been so stupid? She had half a mind to tell the men not to bother, to drop Zell off in the desert and let her try to find her way back to the wall. But she knew she could not do that. Maybe Bran had been right all along. Maybe it was foolish, dangerous to speak to the wall watchers, whoever they were. She tried to focus on the path ahead, finding the most expedient way forward that was close to cover, in case they had to hide. She also scanned for scorpions, snakes, and arachnids, anything to keep her mind occupied, anything to keep her from the disturbing revelation that everything seemed to lead back to Dag. A little after midnight, they stopped for a break in a copse of acacia trees. The men collapsed in a circle, Zell's stretcher in the center of it. Their bodies heaved with heavy breathing, their limbs shaking with exhaustion as they passed around a canteen. A few of them broke open rations and ate. The desert air was cold, and they wore jackets again, along with their head wraps. Sabrina wandered off to the edge of the trees and kept her visor on the sky. She was scanning for Elveds and any other rebel parties when Michael came up beside her. "Did you get your answers?" he finally asked, his gaze locked on the horizon. A desert hare darted out of some bushes and across the hardpan, disappearing into sere grass. With his natural sight, Michael could not see it, but he tilted his head toward the sound. "Just a jackrabbit," Sabrina said. She lifted the visor up to look at Michael with her own eyes. "And no, I didn't." "Would she talk?" "She did, but all lies." "How do you know?" "None of it's plausible." "Well," Michael said, rubbing his whiskers, "you worked at the ministry. You should know what plausible is, right? You knew about all us out here in the desert." "No, I didn't." Sabrina shook her head. She remembered something Zell had said. "Michael, you all stormed the wall for supplies. You took guns. But you took even more helmets, the kind the T-men wear. Why?" "We were ordered to, and I imagine they are for us to wear when, or if, we ever return to the city." "What do the helmets have to do with it?" "I'm not sure," he said, looking over his shoulder and watching his men for a moment. "But among those in my rank, we all have our theories." "What do you think?" A breeze puffed the tree branches above them. Dried leaves tumbled down to land softly on the rippled sand. The moon was just rising on the horizon, orange-red like a blood orange. Michael looked back at her. Even in the darkness, she could see how his eyes were bloodshot from fatigue.
It has something to do with the mind. People come out of the cities out here and say they remember things, almost like other lives. Then kids are born out here and go in on pilgrimage, and they say they can't remember a thing until they return. It's why all the scrits, as you call them, have instructions tattooed on them.
Once they make it back here, they can remember again?
Yep, they are normal.
Grange said he had memories of another life. Do you?
No, I'm too young. It seems only like the 40-somethings and older have those.
Do they have memories before they come?
No, the memories start to emerge a few miles outside the city. About the same time most people who are going to get it fall to the rage.
It's a set distance?
Pretty consistent. We're careful not to go too close when we're on patrol.
What do you all think it is, exactly?
I don't know, but I suspect our higher-ups do. Most of us think it has to do with the comm towers, to be honest. But it's all just conjecture. Where are you going?
Sabrina was making her way back through the trees, her mind on fire.
I need some water.
Sabrina didn't speak the rest of the journey, except to communicate details of their path to Michael and the other men. A few times she jogged back to the rear where Roach and another rebel named Daniel carried the stretcher. Sabrina relieved Daniel. When they stopped for a break and Roach wandered away to relieve himself, she turned to Zell. She had been quiet, but Sabrina knew she was not asleep. The journey was too uneven for that.
How did you know that I know Dag?
Your uncle? I know because of my rank. I'm allowed to assess certain surveillance information. We do watch and listen. To the cities, to the caves. We know more than even Dag. But don't worry. I'm not about to tell them who you are.
Why did you say Dag was the neuroscientist who helped to found the Twin Cities? He wasn't even born then.
A lie, cadet. The cities are not nearly as old as so many think.
We're taught that the cataclysm was 90 years ago. The cities are nearing their 100th anniversary.
Closer to 40. She closed her eyes and saw Jacob sitting in the back of a cruiser, the mesh between them forming a cross-hatch of shadows across his face. His eyes were wide with terror, but also an undeniable urge to trust her.
Why are they out in the desert?
To be safe from the rays.
The sun's rays? The desert does not seem to be a good place to avoid the sun's rays.
No, something worse. Something in the city.
Sabrina took a deep breath, overcoming the same reluctance she had felt when uttering words of cult speak.
If what you are saying is true, the comm towers broadcast out memories to those who have had their identities erased. These people, like Grange, were actually around during the cataclysm?
Careful, cadet. Almost sounds like you are starting to believe me, Zell said, shifting her weight and propping herself up on her elbows. In the faint light of the stars, the blood on her bandages was visible as dark splotches. She shook her head and gingerly moved her thigh. The small movement made her wince.
I'll make sure you are seen when we reach the caves,
Sabrina said, her voice calmer than she felt.
Thank you. What about those people born here? People like me who were born after the cataclysm and the founding. Their only memories are of Fortinbras or Lysander.
From what I understand of the technology, the towers broadcast a signal that interferes with the formation and maintenance of memories. That suppresses the old memories of the old-timers and lets them live believing the implanted memories. Roach was wandering over to some of his fellow rebels who were resting on a chalky outcrop of stone. Michael was screwing the cap back on his canteen and working the laces of his boots. They still had some time, but not much. This is a problem with people like you who are born here, because you can't form your own memories, said Zell.
Like scrits. But then why am I not a scrit? Why can I remember?
Most children of the Twin Cities are treated with a serum, along with their childhood inoculations. This allows them to be unaffected by the calm towers. But there are side effects. A small percentage of the children treated develop some level of precognition.
Precognition?
Sabrina said the word slowly, turning its meaning over in her mind. Visions. They can see the future. Or so some think.
Lindsey
Medina, your friend, Zell said, Sabrina snapping her head around at the mention of her friend's full name. A wry smile played across Zell's mouth. Yes, she is one of them. Dag has gone through great lengths to protect her and other children like her.
Protect them from whom?
Think about it, Sabrina. There are still huge global corporations out there in the world with monetary, political, medical, even military interests. And right here, they have a perfect laboratory and two geniuses creating technologies that can change the world.
2 geniuses?
She said, staring down at the ground before snapping her head back up.
You mean Moshe?
That is right. Corporations, scientists, doctors would love to get their hands on children who can see things that are about to happen. But Dag keeps them at bay with other inventions that are revolutionary. Inventions from your other uncle, Moshe. Dag keeps Moshe scrambled so he won't remember who he is. And, in exchange for his inventions, Dag gets things manufactured. Like your suit. Sabrina placed a gloved hand on her breast, rubbing the mesh of the suit beneath her fingertips. You didn't think they were made in here, did you? Zell said, gesturing at her own suit. Where is the factory that churns these out?
I thought the head ministry.
Good guess, but no. Suits and weapons are outsourced, but the Elveds were created at the head ministry, as far as we can tell. All of Dag's work on cloning remains there.
Cloning?
Zell sighed. 15 years ago, he requested 9 cloning vats, as well as cybernetic interfaces. Corporations paid for it all.
Why?
Think about it. If you can download false memories into a person, you have to also download true ones. Why not your own? Dag may have found a secret to immortality. Most people think he is trying to clone himself. After all, who else could he trust with the maintenance of his experiment, other than himself?
Impossible.
Nothing is impossible. The cloning vats and cybernetic technology are the 2 biggest requests he has made. And his admirers and allies outside the wall were more than happy to fulfill them. Sabrina looked at her suit.
Cybernetics. These suits interact with the mind.
And body. Outside the wall, they have revolutionized fields as diverse as medicine, to search and rescue, to law enforcement, to construction.
So the experiment goes on because Dag bribes the outside world with inventions?
It's more complicated than that. The world has changed, moved on. We did indeed look into the abyss, but we pulled back. The world is a more tolerant place now. The Twin Cities remain to remind us of the danger that awaits us in fundamentalism.
So, it is a more peaceful world?
Yes, immeasurably so. But this experiment cannot be stopped now. Not without serious loss of life.
I don't understand.
When they leave the proximity of the calm towers, 15% of the reprogrammed population experience adverse effects.
The rage.
Zell nodded, her lips a grim line. There is no cure for it. Outside the calm towers, those people are lost. Sabrina stopped and thought about herself.
I can't remember my parents. Is that because of the calm towers, or the treatment I had to inoculate me?
The wind swirled, sending a shower of sand grains onto their shoulders and around their torsos. Zell shook her head, looking at the veins of sand flowing over her body. We don't know. All the records on you are sealed. But what we do know
is that it appears you should be like the Skrits. You were never treated. Never treated. You should be forgetting a lot more than your parents. But something makes you different. Who sealed the records? Dag. No one knows where you came from. No one knows what makes you immune. A lot of people are watching you as a result. Every team man knows your name. They always ignored me. Pretended to, Sabrina. Pretended.
Chapter 27. Cage. They marched through the rest of the night, reaching the caves by dawn. The air was cool, and the sun cast long blue shadows on the limestone face of the hill. Groups of rebels were wandering in from various routes, scrambling up the slope before it grew too light, then collapsing with their loads of weapons, helmets, and wounded comrades just inside the cave mouth. New weapons were promptly taken to stores, but it was the helmets that were cause for the most cheers and whoops of victory. There was a strange mix of triumph and loss in the air. It was not only soldiers who had gone out to the raid. Men who were not fighters had been conscripted, and their wives waited at the cave mouth in silence, their expressions a mix of expectancy and resignation. Those who received the worst news collapsed to the ground, weeping. Michael, panting from the climb up the hill, called medics to Zell's stretcher, which was immediately surrounded by hopeful women, who recoiled when they saw who lay there.
"She is one of them!" "Another!"
One woman simply tisked and made a hand gesture towards Zell and then to Sabrina. It was a cult sign that Sabrina did not understand, but the sentiment behind it was clear. These women wanted their husbands back, not more outsiders. They melted away while 2 nurses took the stretcher. Sabrina was disappointed that neither nurse was Lindsey. Michael was already reporting to one of the elders, a woman Sabrina had seen in the close knot of assistants who followed Theopen like shadows. Michael, with his tanned face, unshaven beard, and layers of sand caked into his clothes and skin, was a great contrast to the elder, with her smooth complexion, polished nails, and pristine robe. Her eyes narrowed on Sabrina as Michael provided a summary report, gesturing to Sabrina and Zell. Sabrina decided to follow the nurses. They carried Zell to the infirmary, an airy chamber with natural light filtering down from a gap in the rocks. The stone walls were shot through with veins of quartz that resembled frozen lightning. The granules glittered and shone in the natural light. These sections of caves, unlike others deeper underground, could almost be called beautiful, but the rickety fans shaking and knocking as they recirculated the air could not quite dispel the odor of vomit and infection. Nor could the noise drown out the cries of the wounded or the urgent voices of rebels in blood-stained aprons carrying basins of bloody water, doing their best to provide care. One section of the cave was filled with wailing and sobs. As Sabrina walked past, she saw all the figures inside covered head to toe in tattered sheets, family members clustered in tight bunches alongside dead men. Even if Lindsey was inside that chamber, Sabrina knew she would not enter. She wandered down to a quieter branch, where the wounded rested on stained sheets, but there was a welcome absence of crying and wailing. Some soldiers even shared soft laughter as they recovered, and tried to make light of their wrapped arms, their bandaged legs, or a patched eye. Some slept. Others hung in some weary space between waking and sleeping.
"Sabrina!"
Lindsey cried out, bounding over from a corner where she had been showing a soldier with moon-shaped eyes how to dress his wounds. She looked radiant and out of place with her bright eyes and wide smile, the silver bells in her hair jingling merrily as she stepped around patients to wrap Sabrina in a hug. She buried her face against Sabrina's shoulder.
"I was so worried. No one knew where you were."
"Where is Theopen?"
"He has been gone since the night you disappeared. Dr. Rindle says he is in seclusion."
"We need to talk. Alone."
"I know a place. I need to show it to you anyway."
She led Sabrina down a passageway they had not traveled since the day they had arrived. As they neared a tunnel where water could be heard, Lindsey turned toward the noise. The air grew colder and heavy with the scent of moisture and earth. She took a palm light from an alcove in the wall and turned it on, illuminating the niter-covered stone. There are no overhead lights in this part, Lindsey said.
What were you doing down here in the first place? Sabrina said, stepping over a protrusion of rock that jutted into the middle of their path.
Trying to find fresh water for the infirmary.
They emerged in a large cavern where a rushing stream, almost a river, passed through swiftly, a beating artery of the mountain. The cave walls dripped with moisture. In the darkness, it was impossible to tell how deep the water was, but it looked too deep and too swift to cross. Lindsey turned right, walking along the bank, the beam from her palm light glinting off the metal struts of a small footbridge. They crossed the stream on the bridge and entered another series of tunnels. They stumbled around a few bends before coming to a large chamber. With sweeps of her light, Lindsey revealed the room, one wedge of visibility at a time. A steel table, a gleaming set of surgery lights, roller trays, monitors, and cabinets of medical supplies came into focus.
It's an operating theater,
Sabrina said.
The robbery at the hospital. I remember you talking about it. It's all here. And it's all hooked up.
Lindsey shook the beam of light so that it traced a bundle of cables that ran through the doorway like a fat snake, then branched out to all the different electronic equipment.
But what are they doing with it?
I don't know,
Lindsey said.
I came down with one of the other nurses to get water. We noticed the bridge and decided to explore. When we found this, we couldn't believe it. There's so much medicine here, and thread and pads. Meanwhile, kids are sick. We're sewing people up with cactus fibers and rationing gauze. Sabrina, what's wrong?
Sabrina's hands were shaking. Sweat beaded on her forehead, even in the cold air.
I killed Bran.
What?
Lindsey looked stricken.
It was an accident, Lindsey. I didn't know about the attack. Theopan sent me. He gave me my suit, told me he would tell you.
He didn't say anything.
Sabrina interrupted her, trying to get the full story out, but before she could finish, their eyes were dazzled as the lights overhead clicked on. Sabrina strained to make out the figures in the doorway. Soldiers, streaming in, weapons raised and pointed at their faces. They shouted for them to raise their hands above their heads. The two of them were quickly outnumbered, and too many aimed their weapons at Lindsey for Sabrina to be willing to resist. One of the soldiers snapped the power cell from Sabrina's belt and pulled her hands behind her back. She groaned as pain shot through her chest, certain that a rib was broken. Lindsey was unafraid of their weapons, stepping forward, her hands clenched into fists, her mouth a frown of disgust. She demanded an explanation.
"This room is off limits,"
Dr. Rindle said from the doorway.
"Why are you hoarding supplies and treatment when people need them?"
Lindsey shouted. She had taken up a package of sterile gauze in her hand and shook it at Rindle. He ignored her question.
"What are you doing here?"
"I came to get medicine and thread."
"Why with her?"
"To help me carry things. The nurses are too busy with freshly wounded."
Sabrina was impressed. A double life as an underground believer had taught Lindsey how to lie convincingly, even without time for thought.
"Your friend is to be placed in confinement. Were you aware she left the settlement without permission? They found her at the wall during the attack, in the company of another ministry officer."
"Theopan sent her."
"Is that what she told you?"
Rindle said, stepping over wires, his hands behind his back, his expression flat.
"Maybe you should ask him,"
Sabrina muttered, smoldering. Rindle seemed to have reached his limit of restraint. He swept into the room, his fingers stabbing out like a dagger.
"Don't you speak to me. You disappear, endanger a long-planned attack, then disobey orders and bring back a prisoner. A spy. There was a reason we ordered not to take prisoners." "I received no such order," Sabrina said. "I was told to seek answers." "Enough,"
Rindle cut her off.
"Theopan will sort this out later. In the meantime, you can sit in a cage next to your prisoner."
"Call him now,"
Lindsey said, refusing to be cowed, even pushing him with her hand that held the gauze packet. Rindle stepped back, his fishbowl eyes growing even larger with surprise. Even the soldiers stood stock still, frozen with indecision at Lindsey's ferocity.
Sabrina was already calculating how she might still free herself and wrest away a rifle if Rindle moved to retaliate. It would be difficult with her injuries, and being so outnumbered. She was relieved when Rindle brushed the front of his robes and collected himself, readjusting the glasses on his nose and wiping the corners of his mouth.
"You were not the one giving me orders here, Miss Medina, but your outburst will be noted."
He returned to the soldiers holding Sabrina.
"Take her to a cage."
"Sabrina, don't worry," Lindsey said as a rebel wrenched Sabrina's arm and led her off to the cell she felt she had always been bound for. Lindsey brushed past Rindle and followed. "I'll find Grange. We'll sort this out." They placed her in a high cave on the cliffs. It was not deep, and so it offered none of the coolness of the lower caverns, save for an occasional breeze that wafted in from the valley. Bats hung from the ceiling, looking as drowsy and defeated by the heat as the guard who was posted along the cave mouth. He leaned against the wall, gazing blankly down into the haze of the desert. The cages were wooden, perfect cubes, the ceiling so low that standing was impossible. Sabrina's hands were tied to one of the cross beams above her head. Zell was in the cage next to her. Sabrina was glad to see that at least her leg was freshly bandaged. As the afternoon passed, Zell remained motionless on the floor. The only indication she was alive was the occasional muffled cry as she stirred in a feverish dream.
"This is insane,"
Denalis said when he came to visit later with a canteen and steaming plate of stew and bread. He untied Sabrina's wrists so that she could pick at the food through the bars. He sat silently, the muscles in his jaw working, his eyes darting at the guard.
"Any word on Theopen?"
she asked, her mouth full.
"None. Some say he's off in battle. Others say he is on a spiritual journey in preparation."
"For what?"
she asked.
"Who knows?"
Denalis cracked his knuckles.
"Lots of rumors floating around about the next stage of the campaign. Dr. Rindle is only interested in shoring up supplies for the soldiers. Meanwhile, Grange is trying to make sure there's enough food for the women and children. It's like we're two different camps, with two different missions."
"Why weren't you and Grange and Sprocket with Bran at the wall?"
Denalis frowned, his eyes darkening.
"You saying we could have saved him?"
"No," Sabrina said, sitting back. "It's just, I was surprised you did not all always work together."
Denalis shook his head, the corner of his mouth twitching downward.
"Already enough distrust between Grange and Theopen. Grange insists that one of us from the inner circle always has to stick with the soldiers on raids. Partly to show our loyalty, partly to keep an eye on what they're up to out there. Bran volunteered."
Bran felt loyal to Theopen? In her mind, she remembered what Bran had said as he put the gun against the woman's head.
"Already too much suspicion on Theopen's part. We can't afford to be insubordinate now."
"Well,"
Denalis said with a sad grimace,
"he would follow any order in battle, but he was loyal to us. That is just Bran. He knew it was dangerous, and rather he be in that danger than his brothers."
Something twisted inside of Sabrina. Although this was the only meal she had had all day, she no longer felt hungry. Denalis had run out of things to talk about, or perhaps Zell, stirring in the adjacent cell, broke the sense of privacy. Whatever the case, he stood up, stretched his limbs, and stared out, thin-lipped at the valley floor below. A line of gatherers, children dwarfed by the baskets on their heads, were making their way back to the caves under the gaze of soldiers silhouetted on the ridge. All the figures were made watery and indistinct from the shimmering heat.
"I can't eat any more," she said. "But can you leave it here for me to finish later?"
"Sure,"
Denalis said. It was the dismissal he was waiting for. He walked towards the cave mouth, stones crunching beneath his feet, his head just clearing the opening. The guard did not immediately come to tie her up, so Sabrina pulled the plate and canteen over, dipped the bread in the sauce, and reached through the bars to offer it to Zell. She stirred, turning her head to the sound of Sabrina's voice and opening her eyes. She moved across the cage to the bread. She was famished and ate the food with diligent concentration.
"Thank you,"
she said in her accented voice. They were the first words she had spoken since Sabrina had been placed in the cage next to her. Sabrina continued, desperate to learn more from her.
I'm sorry. Nothing has worked out the way it was supposed to.
Zell nodded, her eyes sad and knowing. Her gaze darted to the guard. It was enough to indicate that she had no intention of speaking now. Instead, they passed the afternoon and early evening in silence, leaving Sabrina to sit while a chorus of questions blared in her mind. Later that night, they both awoke when 3 soldiers entered the cave. Sabrina recognized them immediately as some of the men she had fought on her first day at the settlement. Rickard was their lead, his arm free of its sling. His face had been so swollen after the fight he had stopped shaving and had grown a beard. Now he trimmed it into 2 lines that circled his smirking mouth. Blondie was there too, his gaze festering with hate. The swelling in his nose had reduced, but the bones beneath had knitted crooked and misshapen. The scabs on his face had yet to fully heal. The scratches on One Eye's face were gone, although his remaining eye still looked red and irritated. Sabrina thought they had come for her. At Rickard's orders, Blondie and One Eye, Vards and Naelis, he called them, opened her cage. But it was only to retie her. As Vards yanked her hands up above her head and Naelis secured her to the slats of the cage, her rib felt as if a knife pressed through it. She held her breath rather than cry out. They slammed the door shut, then moved to the next cage where they yanked Zell out, pulling her on her injured leg. She screamed in pain, which amused the men. She cried out again when, laughing, they forced her to stand on her own, only for her to collapse.
Bastards!
Sabrina screamed, fighting against her bindings as they carried Zell, her uniform covered in the dust of the cave floor now, away to the cave mouth. Sabrina yelled at the guard to find Sprocket, Grange, Denalis, or Lindsey, but he ignored her, turning his face to the dark valley. She kicked at the bars and worked at the rope around her wrists, but she started to bleed before she made any progress at escape. Sheer exhaustion forced her to give up. Suspended above the cage floor, she drifted in and out of wakefulness, in a sleep wherein she was in the same cage, but Lindsey, Dag, and Zell were trapped with her. She had to watch as each of them were carried away by the same rebels to meet the same fate. Finally, they came for her, dragging her to the cave mouth, but there was no valley below, and not even a ledge of rock to stand upon. There was nothing, just a void, and the distant light of stars above and below. The men laughed as they swung her back and forth before flinging her out into the nothingness. She woke. The needle points of starlight were replaced by the raw red dust of the cave. She looked out to the valley to reassure herself that the world was still in place. She was not sure how long she stared, but it was long enough to watch the morning shadows shorten and turn with the movement of the sun. Shortly after, they carried Zell back, her face unrecognizable. Her lips were split, her nose misshapen, and crescents of gaping flesh had opened above her eyes. Her leg bandages were sodden, the treads of a boot pressed into the bloody gauze. 3 of her fingers looked broken. She remained unmoving inside the door to the cage, where Naelis and Vards dropped her, her breath heavy and raspy.
Zell, I'm so sorry,
Sabrina said, heedless of the guard and straining against her bonds. Zell was facing away, but the word she mumbled through her bloody mouth was, "Hush." Sprocket came and released Sabrina from her bindings, handing her a meal through the bars. She wouldn't touch it. Instead, she moved it to the edge of the bars to check on Zell. She was still breathing, but she did not respond to her name. Sabrina entreated Sprocket to give her water. He placed the canteen next to Zell, but she did not move to take it.
Just leave it there.
Fine by me. But don't let them find it inside with her.
Why are they doing this, Sprocket?
He grimaced. Dark rings hung beneath his eyes, which were bloodshot.
She admitted to killing Bran last night.
What?
Yeah. Said she shot him, and the plasma set off one of his grenade charges, and the explosion sent him over the edge of the wall. You all right?
Sabrina shook her head, staring at the inert form in the cage next to her.
Why?
Why did she kill him? I don't know.
It was her job to defend the wall. You still want to give her water?
Yes, Sabrina said too forcefully, then asked, "What is that in your hand?"
Sprocket glanced at the black case with a cracked, convex eye on it. He yawned and wiped at his glasses. He was flipping the case nervously between his fingers.
It's Bran's camera. Recorded his last moments. It's pretty damaged, but Rendell wants me to fix it so we can see what happened up there. I can't say I really want to do it, but I owe it to Bran.
Sabrina swallowed. Yeah, I guess you do.
You didn't see anything, did you? It would save me the trouble of having to reconstruct the footage frame by frame. It's gonna take me days.
Then I have days to live.
She chose her words carefully.
That camera is your best bet, Sprocket.
Right,
he said with a half smile, the grass blade in the corner of his mouth pointing to the sleeping bats.
Hey, don't get down. You are one of us. We're going to get you out of this cage. Grange is working on Rendell. He'll wear him down.
Sure,
she said, guilt opening up a void in her stomach.
Where's Lindsey?
And they've got her in training. She told me to tell you she would be here to see you soon, and that she was sorry she had not been here already.
Sabrina nodded, doing her best to hide the turmoil inside her. Why hadn't Lindsey come yet? Was she angry about what Sabrina had done to Bran? If she was, had she told anyone?
You better eat, Sabrina. Denalius will be upset with me if I bring back a full plate of food.
Leave it here. I'll eat it later.
All right,
Sprocket said, unfolding his legs and standing up, the tools on his belt rattling as he moved.
Hang in there,
he said before he turned and walked out into the red glare of the setting sun.
Zell woke her.
The sun was setting, casting the valley and hills in a blood-red light that spilled down from the clouds, gathering on the horizon. Somewhere out of view from Sabrina's cage, storm clouds were mounting skyward. The sound of thunder rolled into the cave and echoed strangely off the walls. The bats shifted and fidgeted restlessly. A few snapped their wings out, dropped toward the floor before arresting their fall and soaring out of the cave mouth. The guard had moved outside and was sitting on the slope below, the back of his head just visible, the wind of the coming storm flattening his hair and clothes against him. Zell asked Sabrina for water.
The canteen is beside you,
she said, moving as close as possible. Sprocket had left her unbound, but it was still difficult to reach through the bars and move the canteen. She tried loosening some of the wood beams, but they were more secure than they appeared, their ends fit tightly into one another, and had been reinforced with glue and nails. She strained to raise the lip of the canteen to Zell's mouth, where some of her teeth had been broken off, leaving white roots and bloody holes. After a few sips, Zell moved her head away and rested, groaning as she discovered a new source of pain. When she realized the guard had moved, she pulled herself closer to Sabrina, her hands rust-colored with dried blood.
Bastards. How do I look?
She asked in a voice between a whisper and a croak. Her words were hard to understand, her swollen mouth barely able to speak. When Sabrina could not find the words, Zell responded.
That bad. Well, it feels about right.
Zell, I'm so sorry.
Shut up. You wanted answers. You got them.
I still don't understand.
Get yourself together, cadet. There isn't time for me to give you an introductory course on the history of the Twin Cities.
Zell coughed and spat.
But there are some things you need to know. Now shut up and listen. I outrank you anyway.
Sabrina was quiet, staring at the suit Zell wore, nearly identical to her own.
Dagosta is losing control, and he does not realize it. He does not understand the threat Theopen and these rebels represent. He has no idea the forces are so large.
There are only a few hundred men in these caves. Not all of them are soldiers.
That was more than a few hundred that attacked the wall.
Theopen has other camps of trained men, with weapons, with fierce beliefs, and with plans. He and Rindle are preparing to take the head ministry.
How do you know?
We monitor them. They wanted it the investigator helmets because more than anything they fear the ministry's power to manipulate their minds.
Can the ministry do that?
The rebels overestimate Dagosta's power. They don't really understand the technology yet, but Dagosta underestimates them.
Can you or the other wall watchers help stop Theopen?
Sabrina asked. No. We're forbidden by multiple treaties from interfering. Dagosta knows about the rebels. He tolerates them. He believes he is sufficiently protected by the ministry defenses, the security ministry, and of course the Elveds.
He is. Why should we be worried?
Sabrina said, leaning into the bars. He might not be prepared for the scale of the assault.
Even with the Elveds?
Zell shook her head. Those things are not as reliable as you would think. They have been displaying a certain independence. They're nearly sentient. We wonder if Dag is losing his grip on them as well.
But he can just reprogram them.
If he has time. But listen, Theopen has to be stopped. He knows. He knows the Twin Cities are a lie. He knows there is a world outside and he wants to convert it. And if he can't convert it, he will destroy it.
But why?
Zell sighed and looked up to the ceiling and the stirring of bats. The world is different now. Dag forced his people to abandon superstition. But we outside the wall have done it voluntarily.
So you are a world of unbelievers?
No, Zell said, a wave of frustration passing over her features. You can believe anything you want now.
That is the same tolerance Lindsey and Grange want to work toward,
Sabrina said, suddenly hopeful that there was a place for Lindsey, Grange, and others like them outside the walls. Zell shook her head again. We are only tolerant of a belief system in so much that it contributes to human flourishing. Yes, that can be done in many ways, but we don't tolerate extremists, sexists, or fundamentalists. Tolerance is an overpraised virtue. It was tolerance that allowed the extremists to flourish before the cataclysm. No one took a stand against them because they had the right to their faith. What allows us to be tolerant now is a willingness to oppose a moral order when certain lines are crossed. Believe, practice what you want, but let it be free of slavery, sexism, discrimination, violence. She shook her head in disgust. No maiming, no raping in the name of the Lord. At a time it was virtuous to tolerate that. What did tolerance give us? A terrible weapon, unleashed, millions dead, a city wasted. Today we have the courage to speak out against tolerance.
So courage supersedes everything. Courage is your highest virtue.
Zell lifted her chin, her dark eyes smoldering. It is. Without courage, practice of any other virtue is impossible.
Why is Theopen against that, if everyone can practice what they want? He may be a jerk, but he's not sacrificing any children or virgins.
His way is the only way. He abhors a world that has abandoned the rites of the old and the belief in his vision of the divine. If he cannot convert it by force, he would rather see it destroyed.
But how could he? Don't you all have weapons?
Sabrina said, thinking of the arsenal she had glimpsed at the wall. Zell let out a groan that resolved itself in a bitter chuckle. It is an irony. After the destruction that killed so many 40 years ago, the weapons that caused it were dismantled, abandoned, destroyed forever. The technology, however, remains in only one place. The head ministry.
Why?
Because no one said no to Dag. Because Dag views extremism as a disease that he has been trying to contain. And what do you do if a disease outbreak has a resurgence you cannot control? You destroy it, Sabrina said, staring straight ahead. He created it all. He wanted to be able to destroy it as well. Dag has become the thing he hates. A zealot who hates zealots is still a zealot. Somehow Theopen knows about the weapon in the head ministry. He wants to use it himself, harness the technology, and bend the unbelieving world to his will. And I've given him the means, Sabrina said. What are you saying? Sabrina punched the bars of the cage. He just needed something to incite the men. I gave it to him. She explained the trial by ordeal and the events that had taken place since. Zell looked grave. You did give him means, she said. Then it might be upon you to stop him. A bat swung in low through the cave mouth and anchored itself to an overhang alongside its cave mates. The bat spread its wings so that the membranes stretched thin and the vessels and sinews were visible before it wrapped itself in its own embrace and shut its eyes. It was strange to Sabrina that this simple creature possessed the ability to fly beyond the walls, to look upon the truth of the world when she could not. It's sad, though, Sabrina said. A part of me admires these people, my friend Lindsey, for their courage to believe. It comes at such a great risk here. It takes courage to look up into the sky and recognize it is empty, and to take responsibility upon yourself to determine what is right. Zell rolled onto her back and stared up at the bats. Does it work? Is the world outside a good place? Sabrina felt small and childlike, curled as she was against the bars, bent down close to hear Zell's words. Better than it was. When Rickard and the others came for Zell, she and Sabrina knew it was for the last time. Zell went silently, her head up in defiance, before she disappeared from view. She had reminded Sabrina that with all the knowledge she had shared came obligation. Sabrina remained awake the whole night and watched the sun's rays cast slanted shadows on the empty cage come morning. She did not move, did not eat. She stared at the ground, vaguely aware of the movement of light as time passed. A crust of sand and grit from the desert remained stuck to her like a skin in need of molting. Whenever she moved her head, a dusting sprinkled down from her hair to her shoulders and into her face. Her eyes filled with tears. Eventually darkness came, and with it, Lindsey, a belt of medical supplies including gauze, tape, scissors, gloves, and syringes wrapped around her waist, cinching the extra fabric of the oversized uniform. Her hair was drawn back and covered with a scarf, the same khaki color as the overalls. Sabrina moved to the edge of the cage. Lindsey reached through the bars to embrace her, pulling her so close that the slats cut painfully into Sabrina's side. Sabrina did not care. She pressed her face against Lindsey's head, feeling the familiar cushion of her braids, and taking in the soft scent of peppermint oil she used on them.
I thought you weren't coming.
I told Sprocket to tell you. Everything is becoming so political. I was in training and couldn't leave, or else Rindle would have tried to put me in a cage too. I know Grange has been trying to get you out.
There is so much I need to tell you.
Me too.
Where is Theopen?
Still gone, Lindsey said, shooting a look at the guard. He appeared to be slumbering against the wall, his fingers folded, his chest rising and falling slowly.
What is going on? What do you mean time is getting short?
Something big. I know they're planning attacks on the city.
The head ministry.
It is one of the targets. How did you know? Sabrina did not know how to explain everything she had learned from Zell.
Lindsey, we have to get out of here. It's all lies, everything. The cataclysm, it wasn't anything like we were told.
There were other survivors. The planet is habitable. There are millions, no, billions of people outside the walls.
Who told you this?
Zell.
She gestured to the empty cage. A dark blood stain remained on the cage floor.
She works for the ministry. It's more lies,
Lindsey said.
No. I saw a city. It's not Third City. It was too big.
You said it was far away when we were in the caverns. How can you know she's telling the truth? Sabrina rested her forehead against the bars.
I believed her.
But what proof do you have besides a city you saw from miles away? Why should you trust her?
I just do. You could ask her yourself if they haven't killed her yet.
What?
Open your eyes, Lindsey. You can see the dried blood in her cage from the beatings they gave her.
In a lower voice, she added,
She told them she killed Bran.
Why?
To protect me, she said, poking her own chest. Christ, there is so much more I need to tell you. This place is crazy. Theopan can't be trusted.
I know.
What?
Nothing adds up. The secrecy, the lies, the hospital equipment. I don't know if I believe what this woman has told you, but I wouldn't be surprised if they hurt her, even killed her. There are believers who want to fight. Too much. And there are plenty who don't. They plan on relocating to some other caves. There is a lake to the west. People say it's beautiful. They want to resettle near it.
Are you going with them?
No. I'm going to the head ministry.
To fight? She said, surprised.
No. Rindle says they want to capture Dag. He says taking the head ministry and making Dag a prisoner is the only way to take full control of Fortinbras and Lysander. A few of us, Denalis, me, and others, signed up for the assault. I'm with the medical corps.
What do you intend to do?
Make sure Dag is taken alive, and that he gets fair treatment, a fair trial. It seemed fitting. Dag goes to protecting her all these years, and now Lindsey was returning the favor. Sabrina wanted to tell Lindsey what Zell had told her, but she knew she would not believe it, just as she had not.
Can someone else go?
Sabrina asked.
Let's just get away from all this. There is so much we don't know. We have little bits of the truth, and those little bits are dangerous until we know the whole story.
You want to give up on Dag? Sabrina didn't know what to say. Her impression of him had changed radically multiple times in the past days, even hours. But despite all his transgressions, he had raised her. And if Zell was to be trusted, he had protected Lindsey. I can't break you out of the cage right now, Lindsey said. Who is Dag going to trust? Who will he talk to once he is surrounded and captured?
If he allows himself to be captured.
That's why we're going.
It's just so dangerous. What if the city I saw is real?
And what if it's full of ministry workers who will scramble our brains? Sabrina fell back against the bars of her cage and sighed. The movement aggravated her ribs. She winced, and Lindsey reached through the bars and grabbed her hand. Sabrina, we have the opportunity to remake Fortinbras into a new city, a new chance. People are ready. It can be done with little bloodshed. Even Dag might be saved. Sabrina could not find an answer. Maybe the experiment could be stopped without disaster. Maybe it could be done with Dag's cooperation. The time had come. But something else at the moment caught her attention.
Where are your bells?
Lindsey cast her eyes to the ground and touched a loose braid of hair that had slipped from beneath her scarf. I had to remove them in order to join the medical team. For some reason, this was a worse loss than all the other losses Sabrina had borne. She felt angry, tired, mournful at once. She turned her head to hide her tears and studied a knot in the wooden bars of her cage until she had the strength to speak without her voice cracking.
What happens next?
We're being transferred to new locations closer to the city. I'll go with my team. You'll go to the communication camp. It's where prisoners and wounded will be kept. It's also where Rindle will be coordinating from. Sprocket's coming with you, and Grange will be there as well. Although I don't know if he has much influence with the soldiers now.
Why not?
He's completely against the attack. He's advocating for peaceful resistance and nothing else, Lindsey said. That doesn't fly with the soldier types, even some of the non-soldier types.
They don't know about Bran. But Sprocket has Bran's camera. He's going to figure it out.
I'll have to borrow it then. Make sure he doesn't. She winked. Once we have Dag, I'll contact Sprocket. I'll have a secure connection with him. If it looks like the soldiers are going to execute Dag, Denalis and I will get him to safety. Sabrina could picture it, but no plan survived contact with the enemy. Perhaps she could get Dag, Lindsey, and anyone else who was willing to the wall where they could surrender and seek refuge.
Just the two of you are going to keep Dag safe from all those men? Break him out of their grip and get him to safety?
You did it with me, she smiled. And who knows? Maybe this time the Elveds will help.
Then we leave. Then we go to the city I saw.
Sabrina offered. Lindsey frowned. If there's nowhere else safe, we can go. It was the best Sabrina would be able to get.
Don't let anything happen to you. You're all I have left.
I'll be there when all this is done.
Promise?
Promise. Sabrina released her and told her she loved her. I love you too, my friend, Lindsey said. I'll see you on the other side.